The U.S. dollar slipped and gold rose after the Trump administration threatened to indict the U.S. Federal Reserve Chair, Jerome Powell. The Bank of Canada's governor and former U.S. Fed chairs have expressed their support for him. Let's break it down with Alex Morris, CEO, CIO, FM Investments. Alex, as you know, later this afternoon, the market seemed to have shrugged this off. They don't seem to mind as much anymore, the S&P getting to new heights. What's your take on this?
I think much like the markets now, last night, everyone, myself included, had a bit of a running around yelling, very loudly. And we've settled into a bit of a meh sort of response to this. The president's threats to do these things, although quite serious, subpoenas coming to the Eccles building and being told a criminal investigation is being opened into you, are a far cry from what they used to be, in the sense that the president has shown a willingness to politicize these otherwise very simple, very, reasonable processes to his whim, right? We're seeing that Trumpian vengeance is very real and unbounded, certainly in the president's quest to find loyalty in the Federal Reserve and the Eccles building. But let's also not forget, and I think the market is taking this into account, this is Jay's first real plea for more support, and he's getting it from the Senate. And Senator Tillis and Murkowski have made very clear that they can gump the works and probably will until this is stopped. From the Supreme Court, who went out of their way to speak about the independence of the Fed and its ability to do its job in prior opinions, and their likeliness to overthrow tariffs in the coming, and willingness to, hear out Governor Cook. So the expanding of the aperture here for the Federal Reserve, its independence, and Jay Powell in particular, individually, has it really opened. And the market is realizing we're a long way away from anything happening. And we didn't learn anything new today other than the president politicized a process that used to be sacrosanct. But sadly, there's nothing new about that.
Okay, that being said, for investors who are outside of the U.S., what kind of message does it send about the independence of the Fed and whether that's a concern?
I think the Fed's independence has long held this mythical status as if it was truly independent. But over time, it started off independent, and that independence has been eroded through political process over the handful of financial crises that the Fed has endured. And today, there are folks who are political in nature on the Fed board. We've seen the willingness of the Senate confirmation process to gum up the works to make sure that a sitting president gets the folks that he wants on there and delay the opportunity for folks who may be hostile to current policy to be there. So from a foreign perspective looking in, I think you're seeing the erosion of independence, but probably recognizing that a good chunk of that had been eroded long ago. And what remains now is a relatively hostile executive branch. But for the first time in a long time, we're starting to see a retrenchment from the Fed and from the folks who the Fed works for, Congress, to defend that independence.
Okay, so we know Jerome Powell's time is almost up. He doesn't have much longer of a term. We know Donald Trump wants to put a stamp on whoever goes in, a rubber stamp from him. So what does the next Fed chair look like? And will there be concerns about independence moving forward, or do you think Americans and investors are just going to go, okay, yeah, this is what we expected. We've already worked this out?
Well, I think the market is certainly expecting someone named Kevin to do it, with maybe an offside chance of someone named Scott. But odds are pretty good it's going to be a Kevin. War seems to have taken the lead from Kevin Hassett, but it is clear this is a message to the next Fed governor directly from the president. Do my bidding as I ask for it. And the president has expressed his disdain for reappointing Jay, who he felt didn't live up to his promise of what the president thought he was getting, a toady in the Eccles building. That didn't happen.
Do you have concerns about inflation moving forward if you have someone in the chair's place who's just going to do what Donald Trump wants at that moment?
I do, and I think investors should. I think that the board itself has made clear it has concerns about about inflation, both from tariffs and what that might do, from just general policy and what that is doing today and what that looks like.
Okay, we've seen a move to gold last year with Donald Trump's first year in office and the volatility of that year. We're seeing that already happen in the start of this year, of course, with threats to Greenland and the incursion in Venezuela. Do you expect more of this to run out this year?
I think there'll be more volatility. There'll be more political and markets noise that get entered from this. We're going to get a really interesting signal in May. Jay Powell will no longer be the chair, but his governorship continues into 2028. Almost all chairs have left early when that has happened. But given what just happened, we may see Jerome Powell stick around as the last fire break for true Fed independence, and which might actually serve to dampen some of the noise that and some of the rush to these inflation and anti-inflationary securities that you're seeing today.
Okay, but how much power or authority will he have if he's not lead in that group, but he just remains on for the extra 2 years?
He has a very critical role. If he were to leave in May, the president would be able to appoint someone to his seat, which would give the executive branch majority of the Board of Governors. That majority would allow them to hire and fire regional Fed presidents, and therefore the makeup of the FOMC, which sets rate policy, more or less at their will, and fill it up with courtiers that are willing to enact policy that probably is not helpful for inflation or for what the Fed has been working on the last 2 to 3 years. So he could be that critical turn vote, which might be a role that at this point, Chairman Powell feels he needs to take.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there. Alex, thank you very much for joining us. Alex Moore, CEO, CIO, FM Investments.